Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Last week, when a black high school athlete who stabbed to death another white high school athlete found out how much time he will serve in jail, we as a society also found something out. The Daily Wire reports that Karmelo Anthony, not the basketball player, but Karmelo Anthony has been sentenced to 35 years in prison for the murder of high school athlete Justin Metcalf. The jury rendered the sentencing on Tuesday evening, just hours after issuing a guilty verdict on a first-degree murder charge. Anthony reportedly broke down in tears when the sentencing was announced. The 19-year-old also sobbed and was visibly shaking when the guilty verdict was read hours earlier. Daily Mail reported Mary Ann Martinez, who is inside the courtroom, said the prosecution argued before sentencing deliberations that the Metcalf family will suffer far greater than Anthony ever will, no matter the sentence. Quote, "Nothing you do with your verdict, no matter what it is, nothing you do will take more from Karmelo Anthony or his family than he took from a Austin Metcalf." That's what attorney Dewey Mitchell said. He also said Karmelo Anthony is going to have the opportunity to continue to be a son, to continue through his life and find out what he's interested in, maybe meet the love of his life, have children. Austin Metcalf did not have the opportunity to meet the love of his life, didn't have the opportunity to know what it felt like to hold a plaque of graduation, isn't going to know what it's like to have children with someone you love. He's never going to have the time with his parents where he grows up and he gets out of those teenage years. Well, closing arguments for Karmelo Anthony's sentencing said that had Dewey Mitchell speaking for the state when he said, "Nothing you do with your verdict, no matter what it is, nothing you do will take more from Karmelo Anthony or his family than he took from Austin Metcalf." That was a powerful, powerful statement. And outside of closing arguments, the only person to speak during the punishment phase of the trial was Karmelo's mother. When she said, "Please have mercy on my son," this is what she told the jurors while sobbing. And Anthony, who is black, fatally stabbed Metcalf, who was white, at a track event. I think you'll remember this. This dated back to April of 2025 in Frisco, Texas. The case quickly garnered national attention, both due to a narrative peddled by the Anthony family and the glaring lack of coverage from the legacy media, which routinely highlights escalates white on black incidences. Legal commentators have said throughout the trial that the defense had an incredibly poor showing, and the state's case was effectively airtight. Witnesses blew apart any racial narrative peddled by the Anthony family, and video evidence showed that Anthony was not surrounded by a mob of people, but only confronted by Metcalf after he was told to leave the team's tent up to 15 times by different people. Also of note, witnesses say Metcalf explicitly told Anthony he would not fight him. So the trial, from the start to finish, lasted only 9 days, including jury selection. The jury rendered a guilty verdict mere hours after they were set to deliberate. But as I said earlier, I think this trial has really exposed something. I think Ben Shapiro, in his opinion piece, really started to hit on something. He said if the Karmelo Anthony trial had happened under Kamala Harris presidency or back in 2020, American cities would likely be burning right now. Instead, there is near silence. The race baiting playbook just officially broke. You've heard me say, he says, many times on the show that politics is downstream of culture, meaning that when culture changes, politics follows. That culture is the leader and politics follows the culture. But sometimes culture is downstream of politics, meaning that leadership actually matters. And that is partially true when it comes to race relations in the United States. The leadership of our country matters. And when our leaders promote meritocracy, equal justice before the law, and colorblindness rather than diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, well, Americans tend to follow. And by contrast, when our leaders promote racial polarization, Americans also tend to follow. Well, back to Karmelo Anthony, though. A year and a half ago, Karmelo Anthony, a black 17-year-old, stabbed to death 17-year-old Austin Metcalf, who was white, and he murdered him in cold blood in front of witnesses. The case was clear from day one. But Karmelo Anthony's family and his spokespeople began retelling a racial narrative in which Anthony was justified, or at least understandable in why he did what he did, because he was the victim. Of a victim of what? Well, perhaps because of the actual victim, Austin Metcalf, who allegedly threw him out of a track tent, perhaps because of racism, perhaps because of white America more broadly. Well, none of that worked. And on Tuesday, Anthony was convicted of murder. He will see 35 years in prison and be eligible for parole in 17. There weren't any riots, no major protests, not even much of a legacy media response. And that's because in a sane and rational universe in which law and order prevail, Americans understand that race has nothing to do with whether murder must be punished. Murder must be punished, no matter who the murderer is and who the victim is. Would the lack of response have happened if Kamala Harris were president, Joe Biden, or even Barack Obama? I have my doubts. I'm old enough to remember the destruction of racial committee in America when Barack Obama got directly involved in the Trayvon Martin case in 2013. That was the case in which Trayvon Martin, a young black teenager, was killed by George Zimmerman under disputed circumstances. There was a long trial. Zimmerman had claimed that it was self-defense, and the prosecution tried to claim that Zimmerman had done it in cold blood. And Barack Obama got directly involved, saying if he had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon, which, of course, was not true. I remember major riots when a white cop shot a black man who had attacked him in Ferguson, Missouri in 2024. And then the entire legacy media falsified the story, claiming that the cop was racist and that Michael Brown had tried to surrender to him. Remember, hands up, don't shoot. Remember that? Which, of course, never happened. Never happened. Obama again injected himself and said that nobody in Ferguson would have made something like that up. It was entirely made up. Entirely. It is not a coincidence that race relations in America took a nosedive beginning in 2013 to 2014. Remember 2020 when the death of George Floyd almost certainly due to drug use combined with excitement, not police brutality, led to the most disastrous race riots in modern American history. So if Kamala Harris were president, what would have happened after the Karmelo Anthony conviction the other day? Would we be prepping a new round of recriminalizations over, supposed systemic racism in the United States? This is the question we should be asking, because much of what President Trump's presidency is about, his return to power, is about avoiding the worst outcome. And this is just another example of where the worst outcome has been mitigated or avoided because Americans turned away from the race narrative that was sold by the Democrats. On the Karmelo Anthony family Give, Send, Go page, there are comments such as these. I hope you raise $1 million. These white people can die mad like their ancestors did. Whites have been obsessed with black people for years. It's 2025. The hate is embedded into their DNA at this point. They don't know if they love us or hate us. LOL. Too bad. We don't care. How about this other one? I am donating again after seeing the need for additional protection / expenses. I am so glad to see him get released on bond. These crackers need to understand we are not our ancestors and they will reap what they sow. I hope that knife made a full recovery. Justice for Karmelo. Or how about this one? Well, I'm not even going to go on. Let's just do those two. There's no real allegation that Austin Metcalf's behavior was racist in any way. Right from the beginning, the Metcalf family acted with honor. Metcalf's father publicly forgave Anthony in a Christian fashion and explicitly stated that this was not a race issue. The real question is, why didn't this thing explode? Yeah, why didn't this thing explode? The answer is because you did not have people in prominent positions of power, say the presidency, trying to facilitate and foster this. Because in this moment, the president of the United States we've called upon would say justice was done. A murderer is going to jail. And that's all. It's because the American people responded to a decade of racialized politics by saying, we're tired of this. We don't want it. We're not interested in DEI regime that divides Americans by race. We don't want that anymore. We want equal justice before the law. We don't want every criminal situation to become some sort of referendum on whether America is systemically racist. We're not interested in that anymore. And I will say that this doesn't stop leftist liberals from trying to peddle their race hustle, though. I mean, just because we don't want this anymore and we're speaking out, just because of that, it doesn't eliminate them from trying to peddle that race hustle. In fact, Daily Wire also reports Texas Democrat Representative Jasmine Crockett doubled down on her defense of Karmelo Anthony, claiming his murder conviction for fatally stabbing the 17-year-old Austin Metcalf was evidence of a broken system. That's what she said. Crockett told TMZ on Wednesday that the sentence of 35 years was excessive, quote, for a kid who had decided to go under a tent that was not his team's tent, as it was raining and simply didn't want to be put out in the rain by some random kid that he didn't know who was larger than him, unquote. She also added, because if a white boy would have said that they were afraid of a black boy, something tells me that jury that didn't have any black people on it, they would have believed him in his fear. Well, the failed Senate candidate, it's going to be nice when she's gone. The failed Senate candidate said her heart breaks for so many reasons. Anthony was sentenced to 35 years in prison after the jury found him guilty of stabbing Metcalf, of course, on the track. Quote, "It takes me back to what actually made me decide to get into this legislative work in the first place, because I know that our systems are broken. And what we saw with the verdict is the evidence of a broken system," is what Crockett said. And she went on to claim that a lot of people don't know what it is to live as a black person in this country, and that the outcome would have been different had Anthony been white instead of black. Quote, "Oh my God, I know Collin County so absolutely," she said, when she was asked if she thought race was a factor. "And unfortunately, that was not the county for a black boy." Well, Crockett continued to downplay the incident, noting that some people referred to the murder weapon as a tool and called the knife a small object. She also claimed that Anthony should have been given mercy because he only stabbed Metcalf once. Those remarks echoed, previous comments that Crockett made that the knife used in the stabbing should not count as a deadly weapon because of its size. Yeah. During a Tuesday podcast, Crockett claimed that the Metcalf family, who are white, doesn't understand the fear and agony of a black woman. Quote, "Black women, usually black women who have black male children, live in fear and agony every single day. Fear of agony that I promise you the Metcalfs probably never spent a day living that way, and we're going to have just some real conversations about race in this country," Crockett said. The case has garnered national headlines as leftist activisms claim that the jury is racist, and despite testimony from multiple black teen witnesses who reportedly said Anthony was in the wrong. And but even with all this said, in considering all of this, I like how Chloe Trapanato, she writes for the Daily Wire, and she summed things up in her opinion piece this way. I kind of like this. She said, "It turns out you can walk up to a group of young men, you can plant yourself in their tent, you can taunt them when asked to leave, you can threaten them while reaching into your bag, and then plunge a knife into one of their chests and still be staunchly defended by radical leftists. If, and only if, you're black, the victim is white, only then." Well, Jasmine Crockett, one of the biggest, crocks of excrement in Congress, as she puts it, just proved yet again that the left only sees color, and their warped Macanian worldview will never change. After a Collin County jury convicted Karmelo Anthony of murdering 17-year-old Austin Metcalf during a Frisco, Texas track meet, deliberating for all of 3 hours before reaching the obvious conclusion, sentenced him to 35 years, Crockett rushed to the mic. She declared the knife wasn't a deadly weapon. She implied she had done this. She had done the same thing. And then she played the ultimate victim card. Black women live in agony every day that I promise the Metcalfs had never lived through. The knife went 2 inches into Austin Metcalf's chest. It punctured his heart. He died in his twin brother's arms. But sure, Jasmine, tell us more about your agony. It is 2026. A sitting congresswoman is claiming victimhood by just incredible levels, while the family whose son was stabbed to death at a high school track meet for the crime of asking someone to leave his team's tent is told their grief doesn't measure up. The sheer audacity is not just appalling, it's a window into everything that is rotting this country from the inside out. The Democratic Party's race-based suicidal empathy, its prioritization of equity over equal opportunity, and its color-coded dismissal of crime isn't just a policy failure. It's a suicide pact for civilization itself. When skin color determines who gets leniency and who gets the book thrown at them, you don't get justice. You get dead innocence and a society tearing itself apart. The left went soft on crime to make certain statistics look better on paper. Never mind that FBI data shows Black Americans, who make up 13% of the population, account for over 50% of homicide perpetrators. Never mind that the overwhelming majority of Black victims are killed by other Black perpetrators, a crisis the left refuses to address with any of the urgency it reserves for racial theatrics. The problem isn't data. The problem is that acknowledging it disrupts the narrative. Suicidal empathy has consequences. I'm going to say this again. Suicidal empathy has consequences. Irina Zakurska was a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee who fled war and came to America looking for safety. She was stabbed to death on a Charlotte light rail train in August of 2025 by DeCarlos Brown Jr., a man who had been arrested, get this, 14 times and released under cashless bail on a misdemeanor charge, despite a documented history of violence and mental illness. North Carolina Democrats, soft on crime policies, put him back on the street. Their indifference put him on that train. North Carolina eventually passed Irina's law, but Irina was already dead. Karmelo Anthony, meanwhile, is publicly defended by a sitting congresswoman who essentially told the world she'd have done the same thing. But reverse the races. Let's do that for a second. Let's reverse the races. Imagine a white boy who stabbed a black boy. The left would be burning cities down quicker than Graham Plattner cheating on his new bride. They don't want equal opportunity. They want equal outcomes. And they've been engineering it since the Marxists swapped class warfare for identity warfare. Kamala Harris, Jasmine Crockett, Karl Marx, Herbert Marcuse, all imbibed from the same poisonous well. The world is divided into the oppressors and the oppressed. And the only solution to this is dismantling the oppressors by any means necessary. Marcuse preached that tolerance should be granted to the left and denied to the right. Today's Democrats live that sentiment daily. DEI quotas that punish merit, affirmative action that lowers standards, and reparations talk that treats success as theft. The formula is simple. If the right protected class isn't harmed, the hounds stay quiet. But let a white man succeed, or God forbid, defend himself against a protected class attacker, well, the mob descends. This rot has seeped into schools, into corporations, and courtrooms for decades. Class struggle became racial struggle, and equity became the new holy grail, achieved naturally by punishing the productive and excusing the violent is how it works. And how's that working out? Well, it's killing us. Irina is dead because Democrats let her killer out of jail on a promise to show up for court. Austin Metcalf is dead because a young man was raised on a toxic diet of victimhood and anti-white grievance that convinced him that being shoved deserved a retaliatory knife in the chest. In New York City, a homeless veteran is dead because soft on crime policies sprung a career criminal from jail too early. 17-year-old Tyson Goodsell was shot dead in Minnesota in May of 2026. Why? Well, because of Somali gangs. Across the pond, your crystal ball for America in 20 years, 18-year-old Henry Norwalk bled out on a sidewalk after his killer stabbed him with a ceremonial knife, lied to the police, and called Norwalk a racist, and watched British officers handcuff the dying boy instead of calling an ambulance. This week, a Sudanese asylum seeker nearly beheaded a man on a Belfast street. That is what the left's tolerance is doing to us. Blood in the bleachers, blood on the subway, blood on the sidewalks, blood on the streets of Belfast. And Jasmine Crockett, instead of fighting any of it or addressing why black children are born out of wedlock at nearly 70%, a rate that study after study links directly to youth violence and crime, instead of cracking down on criminals devastating her own community, she defends them. Because the theory says to. The theory that law and order are oppression. That family structure is a tool of patriarchy. That borders are violence. That Western civilization and whites are the villains. That it all needs to be burned down. The left is allowing a pervasive and destructive ideology to hollow out this nation. It used to be visible. You could see the consequences of communism and Marxism in famines and gulags and that type of thing. Now it's invisible. It lives in lesson plans, corporate training manuals, and the phones in our children's hands. It has useful idiots like Jasmine Crockett still defending killers by race, still dismissing victims by creed, and still seeing in color only. It echoes the O.J. Simpson verdict, the moment black women cheering an acquittal, not because justice was served, but because it felt good to see someone who is rich and famous and black get away with it. Justice wasn't the point. Keeping score was. So enough. Stop letting people who seek destruction lead our institutions. Be a builder. Stop being a victim. Take what you've been given and do something worthy with it. Karmelo Anthony deserved his sentence. Austin Metcalf deserved to live. It didn't matter what either of them looked like. The reality is that both of these young men deserved to grow up, live past their teenage years, and build something meaningful in the freest nation on earth. That is no longer possible for either of them. If we want a society where young men actually make it, we need to raise them differently in nuclear homes with faith, with gratitude and decency, with the understanding that the world owes them nothing and that building something requires virtue, not grievance. Jasmine Crockett, I can't wait for you to retire. In your newfound free time, I hope at least you attempt to understand all of this. And I think really what all of this shows is that the race hustle is not working like it used to. It really isn't. We are starting to look beyond the lies and the racist comments. And as a society, look at truth instead of skin color. At least I hope so. I would love to hear what you think on it. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.